In 1835, President Andrew Jackson completely paid off the U.S. national debt. He was the only president in history to ever accomplish that feat. However, the next year, an agent of the British banking establishment, Richard Lawrence, tried to shoot him. Jackson survived the attempt. He was luckier than some of his successors when they tried to rein in the money trust cartel. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln rejected an offer of finance from the British banking families and pushed through the Legal Tender Act of 1862. Instead, though, under the legislation, the U.S. issued the first paper money, known as greenbacks. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot dead. In 1881, President James Garfield said, "Whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate." 2 weeks later, Garfield was also shot and killed by an assassin. Now we leap to 1963. President John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 1110. It rescinded the authority of the Federal Reserve to issue paper money. Kennedy ordered the Treasury to begin printing debt-free money. His order gave the Treasury the power to issue silver certificates against any silver bullion, silver, or standard silver dollars in the Treasury. This meant that for every ounce of silver in the U.S. Treasury's vault, the government could introduce new money into circulation. Large numbers of $2 and $5 bills, United States notes, not Federal Reserve notes, were printed. These notes said they could be redeemed in lawful U.S. money, meaning silver. In all, Kennedy brought nearly $4.3 billion U.S. notes into circulation. The Treasury had begun circulating $10 and $20 United States notes when Kennedy was shot dead in Dallas in November 1963. This was shortly after what he initiated just before. Are all of these assassinations just coincidental? You be the judge. The fact that each assassination followed an attempt to obstruct central bank control of our money is compelling evidence to be considered. Immediately after President Kennedy's death, the silver certificates were recalled and replaced, you guessed it, with Federal Reserve notes. The Federal Reserve notes replaced the promise to pay in lawful U.S. money with the slogan, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." I think it's interesting to consider this. President Kennedy's Executive Order 1110 has never been repealed, but no U.S. president since him has tried to enforce it. Recently, the Federal Reserve issued its second round of quantitative easing, or QE2. It will dump another $700 billion, maybe as high as $1 trillion, into the system over the next 6 months. What does into the system mean? In this case, the system refers to the private banks that created the crisis that requires the bailout, and the $700 billion is money that doesn't really exist. Since it will be created out of thin air, adding it to the money supply seriously devalues all the rest of the U.S. currency out there. This may be a good time to revisit what these numbers really mean. I've done this before, but most of us hear these numbers thrown around so casually that our minds grow numb and we cease to grasp what they really imply. Millions, billions, and trillions begin to sound alike, but they aren't. 1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. To put it another way, a person making $50,000 a year will earn $1 million in 20 years. At that rate, it will take 20,000 years to earn $1 billion. At 50 grand a year, you'll rack up $1 trillion in 20 million years. Think about that. Now, on top of that, the government doesn't even know how the money is being spent. The banks and the Treasury Department won't tell the government how they spent the money. In February 2009, the Congressional Oversight Panel, or COP, reported that the Fed paid $254 billion for assets worth only $176 billion. Now, if you're keeping score, that was a $78 billion overpay. In other words, $78 billion that was simply stolen outright. How long would it take you to earn $78 billion? At 50 grand a year, it will only take 1,560,000 years, more or less. Of course, since you're a taxpayer, I suppose that technically you are paying that bill. The second round of the quantitative easing is equally secretive and equally pointless if the intention is to put more money into circulation. The banks are sitting on more than $1 trillion in cash that they're unwilling to loan until the situation stabilizes. Adding the extra money into circulation won't loosen up the banking system's cash reserves or stabilize the situation. It will only serve to trigger inflation, which is precisely what the Federal Reserve intends to do. Printing more money cuts the value of existing currency. The latest $700 billion plus could cause the value of the dollar to fall by 20%. Monetary easing leads to an artificial weakening of the dollar versus the major currencies. A less valuable dollar makes U.S. goods cheaper on the international market, but it also causes prices here at home to rise. Devaluing the dollar through quantitative easing automatically results in price increase on all imported goods that Americans consume by eroding the purchasing power of each American family. This time around, the debate will not be about the price of oil, gasoline, gold, or silver, all of which have risen as the value of the dollar plummets. This time around, it will be about the price of a quart of milk and a loaf of bread. As long as the faucet of monetary easing continues to flow freely to suppress the long-term interest rates and make borrowing cheaper, the price of natural commodities will continue to rise, especially for meat, dairy, and grain products. The question won't be whether you can afford gas for your car to go to the grocery store, but whether or not you can afford the groceries when you get there. Quantitative easing does not encourage consumer spending, nor does it lead to economic recovery. It never has, and it never will. There's a growing movement in America to abolish the Federal Reserve System. Its most visible leader is Congressman Ron Paul of Texas. The idea would be to restore confidence in the U.S. dollar by reverting